It's been a hot minute since we last spoke. It's been a very hot, cold, shivery type of hot minute. Like, it's been a hot summer's day before we last spoke. The prodigal son has returned, returned back to your screens. And as you can see, there's a whole new setup. It's funny because I was actually going through my old YouTube videos before I was recording this. And I was just looking at the different setups that I had. I was like, that's a bit whack, you know? But yeah, we thank God for elevation. We thank God for progress. And we thank God for the return of the prodigal son. You get me? I'm not just back on your screen for vibes and a good time. Don't get me wrong. There's still going to be vibes, still going to be a good time. You get me? But I'm returning to your screens because I've got something. I genuinely feel like I have something worthwhile to give to you. By the grace of God, people are going to be blessed by this. Hopefully you're blessed by this. Over the last month or so, over on my Instagram, I ran like a little beta test. I ran a little beta test of a project that I was working on. And this project is a podcast, right? I ran a little beta test over the last month or so where I released 4 visual episodes of that podcast. And I just thank God because I've been loving the podcast. I've been loving the work that I've been doing. And it's also good to see that people have also been encouraged. So the podcast is called Breathe with Me. And there's a whole story as to how I came up. Well, not I, but there's a whole story as to how I was led with the title Breathe, or Breathe with Me. This podcast, this show will really be a space of just fruitful conversations, fruitful, honest conversations, a space where I can really dive into the mind of the wonderful guests that I'm going to have on from time to time, a space where I can truly be open, or more open into my journal thoughts, because that's where it all began. In my journal, on my knees, speaking to God. Like I said, there's a whole story that we'll probably get into, but not today. Okay? Not today. The ultimate goal for this podcast, what am I trying to do? What am I trying to achieve with this podcast? Ultimately, this podcast, as well as everything that I try and do in my life, is number one, to glorify God. That is number one. That is top tier, to glorify God. And number two, this podcast, I really want this podcast just to be a space, like I said, of fruitful conversations, of intentionality, where I can just really help myself to breathe. And I can help other people to just breathe and, encourage people to breathe, because there's so much going on in our lives. There's so much going on in the minds of a young man, in the minds of a young woman. And oftentimes I feel like we're trying to navigate all these things by ourselves, right? I know for a fact that, I've navigated quite a lot by myself. But I thank God for community, and I thank God for just where he's bringing me. And I really just want to share that with people. I want to share that with people, and I want people to also share their story with you as well. I want you to be encouraged by other people's story. And I know that, with the guests that I'm planning on bringing on, by the grace of God, you will learn something. You will learn something. I will learn something. And that is the goal. Breathe with Me is a space, a podcast, a show, whatever you want to call it. This is essentially a space propelled by the continual acquirement of growth, propelled by the continual acquirement of fullness and knowledge to wisdom. And by the grace of God, we will serve the community. We will serve you with just one thought and one breath at a time. So, without wasting any more time, I am your host, Manny, and I want to welcome you to just breathe with me. Let's have some fun. All right, deuces, I'm out. Peace.